Hello, everyone. Welcome to another virtual event with Mysterious Galaxy. I am Nick, the Director of Events and Digital Marketer for the store. Today, I am joined by two wonderful authors. It would be three, but Wayne apparently is MIA, and hopefully he'll be able to join us later in the program. If not, we'll make do. But with us today, we have Puja Guha, author of the international best-selling The Ahriman Legacy series. I was born to a family of acclaimed Indian architects. Today, she works as an independent consultant on international development programs, primarily in Africa and South Asia. Hi, Puja.
Hey, Nick. How's it going?
Good. We also have joined with us Sena Desai Gopal, a journalist specializing in science and medicine, food, and travel. Her work has been published in the Boston Globe, The Atlantic, Modern Farmer, and the Times of India, among others. Hi, Sena.
Hi, Nick.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know you're overseas, so everyone, there might be a little lag. It's one of those things we've all had to deal with in the last 2 years, right? And I'll give introduction to Wayne, who isn't here right now. Wayne Johnson is the multiple Pulitzer Prize-nominated author of the acclaimed Paul Two-Person Mysteries, Don't Think Twice, and Six Crooked Highways, a thriller, The Devil You Know, and many other works of fiction and nonfiction. So if you all who are watching haven't yet purchased your books, you can definitely get your copies here with Mysterious Galaxy. I am sorry, and we don't have yet Sena's book in stock. It has been delayed, like all the other things that we've noticed for the last couple years, but we will be getting them. And for any purchase of your books from either one of our three authors, you will get signed book plates either for pickup or delivery, whatever you choose. If you have any questions that you want to ask Sena and Puja, go ahead and click the link below that says Ask a Question, and we will ask those questions later in the program. So for now, I'm going to take it away and leave it to Sena and Puja here. Okay, I'll see everyone later in the program.
Thanks, Nick.
Hi,
Sena. Why don't you, let's start by talking a little bit about our books.
Yeah, that sounds good. You want to go first?
No, go ahead, please.
Okay, so The 86th Village, it's my debut, and it is a book that is based in a village in India that is supposed to drown in the backwaters of a huge dam project. And the setting of the book is not fictitious because I come from a village in India which is going to drown in a dam. So the setting is very real, but the story and the characters are all, I made them up. So the dam is just kind of festering in the background, and then there's this story that's going on. And both the progression of the dam and the story, they're like almost in parallel. So that is what the book is in a nutshell. Puja, you.
Cool. It sounds like we both have a little bit of parallel storylines or parallel timelines. Yeah. So my book, Sirens of Memory, is about a Kuwaiti woman who is in an arranged marriage right before the first Gulf War. And as the war breaks out in Kuwait, she arranged abusive marriage, I should have said. As the war breaks out, she basically thinks that her husband dies in the shuffle, and she hides out at this refugee camp with a lot of different Indians, since there were 150,000 Indians in Kuwait at the time of the Gulf War. Eventually gets airlifted out. And then fast forward 25 years, she has a new life with an Indian man she met at the camp. They have a daughter together, and it turns out that the abusive husband is still alive, and he finds her, tracks her down.
Wow. So why did you decide to do this? Like, have you lived in Kuwait? Is that part of it?
Yeah, I grew up in Kuwait primarily. So I spent some of my early childhood in Toronto, and then most of my life in Kuwait until university. And
right.
In
so
the
Gulf
War.
No, you go. The Gulf War.
I was just saying, the Gulf War is definitely something, and we were not there at that time, but it's always been with me. It's stories I heard as a kid, from family, friends, and things like that. Even watching the news when it had just started. Of course, I wanted to watch cartoons, and my dad said, "No, we really need to watch the news today." So
yeah.
What about you?
So the 86 Village is interesting, Pooja, because I didn't start writing it as a thriller or crime novel. I didn't write it as any particular genre. I just wrote it, and it fit this category. But it's also climate fiction. It's climate crime because of all the changes that happen environmentally because of big dams and everything else. So it's climate fiction. It's political crime. So it's different levels, but it's not like the fast moving crime that you see. It's like really slow and it's very painful. So yeah, that and yeah, it is rooted in reality because I know this personally. Yeah, so that's about it. I think and the inspiration, of course, was living in this kind of an environment all my life as starting as a child, because this dam has been hanging over the village for like 50, 60 years.
You knew even as a kid
yeah.
that the dam was falling apart, kind of thing?
Yeah. So yeah, it just started as a project of my vanity, and then it turned into a book.
How has that transition been? Oh, Nick.
Yes. So yes, I decided to come in and help a little. I'm sorry, everyone, that Wayne wasn't able to show up. We were hoping he would contact us. I hope he's okay. But yes, Sena, so how was the transition from being a journalist, writing about science and medicine and food and travel, to now a novelist? How was that? Where did the idea to start this project and finally get it on page and have it published? How was that?
So I did start, reporting on it, as a journalist. I started researching the dam because it just was so mismanaged and so corrupt. And then eventually, when I researched it, quite a bit, I realized that I could not really write an unbiased journalistic piece on it. It's not possible. If you are in the situation, it's not objective. So I turned it into fiction. But the skills, Nick, are the same. You write a story, and in this case, usually when I'm interviewing people, I interview them, but in person. But here, all the characters were in my head, and I interviewed them in my head, except I knew exactly what they would answer me. So I think that was the difference. So I already knew what they would say, but it was kind of the same skills, taking data and converting it into something that people can understand, right?
Did you
and
have
of course, there's a lot of creative leeway. Yeah.
So I think you were slightly touching upon that. So how was it them responding back to you? Were there any moments that you were surprised that the character was like saying something, or this is what my motivation and what I would do? Because I think authors have said that in the past, where they really think about their author's motivation and they sometimes get caught by surprise in what the characters would say back to them.
Yeah, many times, yes. But then that actually makes it much more interesting, right? Because you keep, if they say something that you don't expect them to say, then it creates another hurdle for you to overcome. Another hurdle in the plot. So that does happen. But the overall theme, I knew what I wanted. These were like just the small things. I knew what I wanted them to do.
Perfect.
And they did it.
They worked for you. You got them to do the thing. Now, Puja, you have also written another series. How do you pronounce it? I probably got it wrong the first time. Is it Ahriman Legacy series?
Yeah, that's actually right.
Oh, yay! Oh my gosh. So how was that series compared to writing Sirens of Memory?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing is that my process, well, it's not been consistent across any of my books. I have done complete stream of consciousness type writing. That was in my first book in the Ahriman Legacy, and then moved into more plotting. And then with Sirens of Memory, I actually did plot the whole thing. Some authors will even plot down to the level of each chapter. I did not do that, but I had I had the ending before I started the book, which is, I don't think I had done that before. And then, the other big thing was, so all of my work is very international. It's very close to me in terms of the places that I set things in.
Mm-hmm.
But writing about the Gulf War and the potential impacts, and then knowing the impacts I've heard about from family, friends, that felt much closer. And on top of that, I think just emotionally, the book felt closer because it's a story about a woman who's been abused and sort of coming out of that. And while I haven't, thankfully, had quite as much of a traumatic experience, just the experience of like dealing with the sort of scars we form from XYZ events of our past, and how those things come back and really can stay with us, for years and years, even if we think we've forgotten about them, if we're not thinking about them, but they're actually really there. And so that process it brought a lot of emotions to the surface as I thought about different things that I've experienced.
So that brings up an interesting thought. So both you, Sena and Puja, have written some stories that definitely have not the happiest subject matter, but definitely stories that need to be told. Because especially outside the United States, we're not really going to hear anything about them beyond what's told to us in the media, like just straight on the news. And even that's not going to have the whole story. So first, you, Sena, how was writing such a story that definitely is not a happy one? And I know you probably have used to that as journalism, but in terms of a long narrative, how was that for you?
It was pretty easy because there's so much creative license when you're writing fiction. So you can use, within reason, I can make up things. I can make up a scene that may not be totally accurate. And there are scenes in the book that are almost like, fantastical, which you wouldn't see in real life, but I could do all that just to make it much more suspenseful. So in that way, it was quite easy. But what was the hard part was to take all this like data I'd collected and turn it into fiction, like make it something creative that people can understand, because you still have to stick to the fact that this is what happens and this is how the climate changes, but how do you do it in a fiction form? So that was a little challenging, but it was a good challenge.
Definitely. And I imagine with your background in journalism, the research part, you probably had quite a bit of research that you felt like, okay, I have a great amount. Now I can do my fictional part.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, it was a ton of research. Yeah. And it was actually fun to do it.
Good. That's good. How about you, Puja?
In the story, I think it really just sort of came out. I had the original idea, the one-liner idea of a woman who flees this abusive marriage through a refugee camp in Kuwait, and then that the husband finds her. That was the original idea. And it just kind of sat dormant for a while. But when I picked it up and I wrote down, I did basically a plot sheet, like a 2-page plot description of the different parts. And from there, turning that into a book, it just sort of happened. I was also very lucky. So I did a writer's retreat, a self-directed one in Austin.
Cool.
I've done a few different ones, and I really like this sort of self-directed structure where I just kind of go somewhere on my own and write. So I was writing at least 3,000 words a day
Oh my gosh.
6 or 7
Wow.
days a week
Wow.
there. And, I mean,
Wow.
just on the retreat, not in normal life. So the retreat was supposed to be 2 weeks, and I figured I'd get as far as I got. And then I was going to leave on a trip to South America for my freelance work. And my trip ended up being postponed. And so I ended up having 3 weeks in Austin, and I was supposed to come back from that trip and go see family in San Francisco. And so the trip was postponed, I think, by 2 or 3 weeks. So I basically had 3 weeks in Austin and then a week and a half or so in San Francisco. And once I got to San Francisco, I was so close. I had written so much of the book, which I couldn't believe because I never thought I would get, a significant, I thought I would make good headway and then I'd finish it when I came home. But I was close. So then I just pushed through and I was like, I'm going to finish this before I leave. And somehow I did. So I don't know, something about the momentum and just being on my own and having that time and mental space. The book just happened.
Congratulations. Wow.
So that was like 4 weeks? You did a book in 4 weeks?
Yeah, I think, it was 4.5. It might have been 5 weeks in total. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I'll ever be able to do it again. I think about that time when I'm working on new stuff now, and I'm like, oh, if only. But just the thought is so exhausting.
Can you remember any of that time? Are you familiar with NaNoWriMo by chance?
I am. That's actually how I got started.
Okay.
I wrote my first draft of my first book during NaNoWriMo. Yeah.
So it doesn't look like you're familiar with what NaNoWriMo is, Sena?
No,
so
I'm not.
It's a thing here in the United States that grew over the last decade. It started by a group that said, you know what, we're just going to sit down and we're going to write a book in 30 days. And it eventually became a November thing. So yeah, it's basically what Puja did was her own NaNoWriMo. Within 30 days, you have to get from start to finish at least 50,000 words of a draft. So you did your own NaNoWriMo right there.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so what is the incentive to do it in 30 days? How do people do it? I mean, I know you went into retreat, but a regular person, how do you do it in 30 days?
So it's a lot of people doing it like a self-motivating kind of goal for them, like a reason to actually sit down and write something. They have a website. Right. There's a large community around it. They actually do what's called word-a-thons, where okay, on this day, try to do double your word count. And so it's built a big community around it in the last decade.
Yeah, they also, I remember when I did it, they send these little almost pep talk emails kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember how often, maybe at least once a week, probably more, but they can be really helpful. I remember one in particular that stayed with me across all of my work, which is that, some days the words are going to be easy. They just happen. And other days it's going to be every single word is just so much work and so difficult. And I remember the pep talk that they said, no one who reads it will ever know which one it was. And I try and remember that because it's true. I mean, when I revise my work, I don't know which one was on which day. I don't remember. But so at least you're still doing quality work even on the days where it's really pulling teeth.
Yeah.
So since we have an author with a debut and then an author who has written books before, I want to get kind of both of your writing habits, or if you've gotten to a rhythm or you found what has worked for you so far. So Sena, have you gotten over writing this novel? Did you find a rhythm or a process that has worked for you so far for this book?
Yes. So the fact part of it, I would just list it. I had, almost in chronological order what happened and the characters, the outlines. But in terms of writing it, I often read something that inspires me. So I'll read some of my favorite authors, and I read them again and again and again. So I'll read them again and again, and then I get inspired to do it. And the other thing I do also is I leave sentences half finished so I can pick up the next day. If I finish a page or if I finish a paragraph, it just seems more like final and it's hard to get back in. But if it's a sentence halfway, it just bothers you, right? You want to finish it. So then that's one of the tricks I use.
Now, do you type or do you write it out first and then type it?
I do both. So if I want to slow down my thought process, I will handwrite.
Okay.
I'll handwrite because but most of the time I do type it.
And what?
But I find that handwriting, yeah.
Oh no, go ahead.
Sorry.
Yeah, you found handwriting.
I find it much more productive if I, have this time or I'm inclined to. The words just come out better, as opposed to when you're just cranking it out and you can delete and you can do spell check and grammar check. So
Yes.
yeah, that's one of the tricks. Yeah.
And I'm curious, what are some of your authors or books that you go back to for inspiration then? Because you just mentioned that you do that.
Yeah, so I have a couple. So I read God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy.
Okay.
I read that a lot. I think I may have read it like 50 times or more. And I read a lot of Yeah, I love it. I mean, every time I read it, I find something new that, that I hadn't noticed before. And I read a lot of Marquez. I like Marquez. And then I have a few nonfiction books that I read too. Mainly like climate change. There's one called Everybody Loves a Good Drought. It's a series of it's all the corruption in different projects in India. So there's a few books I read. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Now, Puja, same thing. Officer, having written books before and now this last one, have you gotten into a rhythm of writing your books, a habit, or is it like out the window for each one?
So the mix of outlining to straight writing has definitely changed with each book. But I do some writing work basically 5 days a week. I usually try and do it first thing in the morning if I can, unless I'm dealing with meetings that have a big time difference. Sometimes I'll wake up early for meetings in Africa or something like that. But so that's number one part of my process. I'm similar to what Sena was saying about, being able to delete things when you're typing. I do type. I don't handwrite really, unless I'm outlining. Then I outline on a whiteboard often. And then sometimes I outline it in a Word document. But it's a whiteboard with index cards that keep moving around, and then some get thrown away and new ones get added, things like that.
Oh, it's like storyboarding. Okay, cool.
Yeah. And it confuses my dog a lot.
Okay.
Like, what are these magnets? Why are they? But but when I'm writing in the Word doc, when I'm typing, I pretty much don't delete. I just, if I want to rewrite something that I've written, I just space it down. So I take the old thing and I just move it to a different section of the document, or I just move it down if I'm writing like in straight chronological order of the book. And then that way it's just there for me to refer to later. And most of the time I don't look at it again. It just gets deleted later. But it gives me comfort that I haven't actually removed it. And then in some ways when I'm writing, when I'm drafting a first draft, I usually do write to a word count target. And sometimes I feel a little bit better that I still gave myself credit for the words that I rewrote. I think they do still matter, even if you change them.
So how about you? Are there any books or authors that you go to for sources of inspiration?
Not as often as Sena, but definitely there are some books that I go back to. I mean, one of the few books that really inspired me to write is Icon by Frederick Forsyth. I mean, I love many of his other works, and The Day of the Jackal would be his best known piece, but Icon for me is the book that I read it the first time when I was 15 or 16. I was supposed to be studying for my history final or something, and I read that book mostly instead. Although I covered all the Cold War pieces because of the setting. But so that's definitely one when I'm feeling like I have less of these moments now, but I definitely still have them from time to time when I don't really know why I'm doing this. That's a good one that I always find to be inspirational. And then another one that I just think is such a beautiful piece of work is All the Light You Cannot See. I think I've got that title correct. I'm blanking on the last couple words, but I think that's right. And that, it's much more of a literary fiction type of story, but it's just so powerful and moving. And so that is one that I don't necessarily reread often, but I think about.
Wonderful. Excellent. Good answers. So I can't ignore the last 2 years. Like, I'm pretty sure everyone can't. So how has that impacted both of your writings or the editing for your books? Start with you, Sena.
How has that impacted? I don't think it has in any significant way. Certainly, I had a little more time I did have a little more time than before, because a lot of the journalism work I was doing, there were some things we had to put on hold. Especially, I'm a food writer, so that went I tossed that out of the window. And we had to find different things to write, and travel writing went out the window. So
you don't say.
So then I actually. Yeah, I know, right? I mean, who is, no one is traveling anywhere. And so I did have more time to write, but also I don't think it wasn't a happy place to write in. It was just, you did it because there was nothing else to do. And
totally.
So I won't say I did my best writing in the last 2 years, but I did draft and redraft and kind of polished what I had. But I didn't write anything new.
That's fair, and I have heard that. I've heard many answers from authors doing virtual events, and it's kind of the same thing. Some authors have said, you know what, creative-wise, this has been like the worst time for me, just because with everything going on, they couldn't find inspiration.
Yeah,
and it felt more like a chore instead of like a source of joy, like it used to be.
Yeah. Well, there's also this other thing that you had the luxury of sitting and writing when there were other people who had, did not have that luxury.
Yeah.
So your focus was, do I write well or not? It was kind of I was in this privileged class.
What about you, Puja?
And I think so. I was pretty used to working independently. I haven't gone into an office or anything like that in a long time. So from a pure process standpoint, it didn't feel like that much changed. But I do think that overall, there was definitely more of a sense of exhaustion. And then travel going away, travel is definitely a big source of inspiration. And luckily, like Sena said, there's a lot of privilege there, and there's a lot of places that I've been to that I still haven't written about, so those are still very much on my list. But having that limitation in place, for sure, just changes your mindset a little bit. I think I was also quite lucky, though, being here in Colorado. There's so much outdoor space, so it wasn't nearly as isolating for me as it was for a lot of people, especially in bigger cities, because I could get outside. We have the trail across the street, and because there's so much outdoor space, I did see friends, I think, more than a lot of other people did. So we would walk our dogs together and things like that. And I did, I was able to it was much shorter. I didn't take any like flight travel retreats, but I did take a 1-week retreat at a ranch in the mountains, actually to do the revisions on this book. So I think I was very lucky in many ways, but it was still, there's definitely a bit of a cloud over the whole time period and just what you wanted to do versus what you were able to do. And that, there's generally just being a difference there.
Totally makes sense. All right. I think it's time now we take to some audience questions. So the first one I'm going to ask, Sena, are there any stories from your time as a journalist that you would consider as an inspiration for future novels?
Are there any stories? No, actually, maybe a few, maybe a couple that are like travel food kind of stories, placed, different parts of the world. Actually, it's interesting because I'm in Istanbul right now, and I did a couple of pieces a few years ago on some archaeological site in the east of Turkey and food. And I think that I was thinking it would be a very good place to write a novel. But yeah, and India, I think I've done a lot of stories on Indian food, Indian street food, and there's such a strong anthropological experience in that I can see basing a book in one of those, cultural hot points.
Good. Puja, did you have to do research to supplement your story for this book? If so, what do you prefer, writing from your personal experiences or writing from research?
I think it's always a mix. I definitely do draw a lot on personal experiences because I tend quite heavily towards places that I've spent a decent amount of time in on the setting front. In this case, I definitely did some research. I spoke with some of the family friends who I'd heard stories from, but I asked them for more details and things like that. Plus, it's very different when you hear a story in passing versus when you're really paying attention. And I was lucky enough that they were, open and willing to talk about all that stuff because I imagine that it's not always the easiest thing. And so I think in terms of preference, there's definitely, it has to be a mix. I think for me anyway, I don't know that I could write. I think it would be difficult. It would be very different for me to write about something that I had really a very minimal personal connection to. At least in some sense, there has to be something, whether it's character, whether it's setting, whether it's part of the plot. I think it would be really challenging otherwise.
Understandable. Very good. This next question is for both of you. Which do you find more challenging, writing a first draft or editing? I'll go to you first, Sena.
Oh, both. Both are equally hard to do. Because, you write a first draft and you know that parts of it are crappy. So you have to, first it is hard to really get a first draft and cook up a story. And then you're forced to check out big portions of it. So I think they're equally bad. And then, I'm sure all writers do this, multiple drafts. And in the end, you have kept maybe 20% of what you first wrote.
Yeah. the transformation from first draft to final draft, I don't know why I'm always surprised, but I hear that a lot. It's like, yeah, it's nothing like the first draft. What are you talking about? They're completely different books.
Yeah, exactly,
Pooja?
exactly.
I think when I think about which one's easier, it's whichever one I just finished, because whichever one I'm doing now, that one feels harder.
The current thing is hard.
Current thing is the hardest. Yeah, and especially the book I'm working on now, I started writing it without an outline, and then got a little bit stuck and started outlining a little bit and going back and forth between the outline and the draft. And yeah, I mean, it's not editing, but it's still very hard. But it's hard.
Let it never be said writing was super easy.
Yeah.
For both of you, what part of a book is your favorite to write? If any part is favorite to write. Characters, plot, setting, dialogue, or etc. Sena.
My favorite part is probably the setting. I find, I like really atmospheric settings. So that's my favorite part. And then I make the characters fit into the setting. That's my trick.
Wonderful. What about you, Puja?
I mean, I'd say setting as well. I mean, setting, I kind of almost consider it its own character, because I think there's so much depth to be given to it. But I do draw very heavily between of the characters and the setting kind of together. Like, so the character's reaction to the setting if it's a new place, or the character's history with the setting if it's not a new place, that kind of thing. So that it's very intertwined in my process.
And I love that you mentioned that, because I have also heard that, not too often, but that writers should treat their settings like a character, because they will have big parts in books, obviously. Good answers. All right, next question for both. If your books were to be adapted, would you want them done as a mini-series, TV show, or a movie? You first, Sena.
A movie. Definitely a movie.
Do you have any ideas for who you would want your lead actors to be?
do you know something? I did a whole bunch of posts on Twitter and Instagram because I had these actors, Indian actors, that I wanted to play these different roles.
Awesome.
So it's funny you ask.
Awesome.
So I already have it in my. So I already have them in my head, and yeah, I know exactly who should play what part.
Everyone, if you aren't already, follow Sena's Twitter so you'll get those answers. How about you, Puja?
I would say probably number one choice would be a mini series. I think you can really spend a lot more time in the story rather than having to wrap it up, in a 2-hour plot. But I mean, I'd take any of them. I think they would be wonderful.
For any producers out there.
Past front, though, no, I haven't done a whole lot of thinking about that. Back around the time that my first book came out, or maybe within a year of that, a friend and I spent some time talking about that. He was really into it, so we spent a while talking about that. But I myself haven't with this book. I just, the main thing is that I would really want to make sure that that the characters are able to deliver on those, and you have actors and actresses from all over that can deliver on, an Arab character or an Indian character or whatever. But that's something I would be very, very cautious of, because there's so much that's culturally significant, and the story doesn't work if you don't have that. So
first thing, make sure it's done right. That's the biggest part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, next for both. Were there any scenes or facts that you wanted to make it into the final draft of your books, but ultimately didn't? You first, Sena.
Well, they scenes. Yeah, quite a few actually, because as I said, the first draft was nothing like the last. So literally I had to check out like big parts of the book, but there were a couple of scenes that I would have liked to kept, have liked to keep. It just didn't work out. There was one scene where there is a conflict between two of the characters, and it takes place in the kitchen, and it was like a really, really great scene, but I had to throw it out. So yeah, there were.
You should have it later that like on their next book. If you want to see deleted scenes from my previous book, buy this version.
Yes. Yeah. No, it was actually a very fun scene too, because these kids are playing a prank on their nanny, and it was a really fun scene, but I had to check it out. Yeah.
I hope you get to reuse that for a book later on, because when you have like something you really loved, you're like, I'm just going to put this in a drawer for later. Hopefully it can fit into something else.
Right.
How about you, Puja?
I didn't have a lot that got completely cut, not in this particular book. For some reason, that outline into that first draft, I didn't make a lot of major plot changes. I did restructure the timeline, so there were scenes that got combined, and then there were actually scenes that got added. I don't think that there was any major, just remove this scene. I run into that a lot more in my my spy thriller work. Like I was looking at, I was kind of doing a catch-up read and then like making some edits and adding some scenes today, and there's this quite a large few page chunk that I just tagged with a comment like, I'm probably going to delete this. I don't think this moves the plot. We don't need this dinner scene. We're just going to go straight to that next scene. So I think it seems to happen more in the sort of like spy thriller, really complex plot. Every scene has to serve like a very clear purpose towards this, especially because you have scenes in different cities and just a lot of different characters that have different roles in the plot, and you have to kind of get that together within a reasonable time frame. With this one, it wasn't as much actually. One of Chantel, my editor's first comments when she had read the book was that she wanted me to pick up some parts of the pacing. And in that process, I changed the timeline around. It was originally a big flashback in the middle, and then I changed it to a 2 timeline structure, where that way you could see during the Gulf War piece of the book, there's a lot that happens right when the war breaks out, and then the actual, getting out of the refugee camp and stuff, that pace is slower. Whereas in the modern day timeline, there's this period before the husband has tracked her down, where it's more about her dealing with trauma and therapy, and then suddenly he finds them, and then things really pick up. And so you have this big contrast in the time frames. And when I restructured the timeline, I definitely had to add a few scenes and things like that to make those contrasts even more dramatic.
Oh, fun. Good answers there. All right, so this one's a fun question. What's your favorite snack or beverage for when you're working on writing? Do you have a favorite snack or beverage, Sena?
Do I have a favorite snack or beverage? Oh, I have to think of that because it just varies. But yeah, it's a lot of like, it's a lot of Indian munchies, like savory Indian snacks that I munch on that you only get in Indian store or I bring from India. So those would be my favorite, and I kind of protect them, and no one gets to eat them.
Do you like? Is this like This is my writing stash of snacks. No one touch them. Get away.
Well, my family doesn't even know where they are, so
Oh gosh, that's awesome. Oh, that's so cool. What about you, Puja? Are you that protective of your snacks or beverages?
No, but mostly, I don't have. So my biggest snack is fruit, but I mean, this is not just while I'm writing. This is like 24 hours a day. I can just
nice.
eat
Well,
fruit, like
definitely a healthier snack than I have.
Fair, but I mean, I can eat like an entire bag of clementines in one sitting, no problem. That's not a very productive writing session because you need 2 hands to peel the clementines. But so yeah, and my husband does not eat fruit like I do, so I don't need to hide anything. It's just in the fridge. With drinks, I go through phases. Sometimes I drink coffee, and then more recently, I've just been drinking water with an electrolyte mix in it. The electrolyte mix is really tasty, and I found it makes me drink more water, and it doesn't interrupt my flow because I don't have to. With coffee, I would get annoyed when my coffee would get cold. I'd have to go and microwave it, and that interrupts my process. So the water doesn't seem to do that as much, but I'm sure I'll go back to coffee too at some point.
I am very much an iced coffee person. If I don't have my iced coffee per day, watch out, coworkers, because something's going to happen. All right. And this looks like it's our last question from the audience. For both of you, can you talk a little bit about what you're working on now or what you'll be working on soon? Sena.
So I am thinking about a prequel to this book because the first book that I wrote, it was in a time period that happened before this, but we didn't use it. It wasn't, it just didn't work out. So I'm thinking of redoing that and kind of connecting it to this because the previous book had the parents of these characters that I have now. So definitely that will be the next book. It's just that I don't know how I will work it to kind of, because this didn't start as climate fiction or crime fiction. So I have to just make it work in a different way. But the research is there, the characters are there. I just don't know how I'm going to use them.
Fair, very fair. What about you, Puja?
What I'm working on right now is the 5th and last book in my spy thriller series. So the series follows 2 characters. One is a former spy who keeps trying to not be a spy. She's an Iranian American. And then the other one is an assassin, and then they basically have to start working together on different things. And so the plot of the series follows that. And this last book is really about him confronting that past. So, he starts out with a much more normal life than an assassin. And then, his life sort of goes off the rails in Iran. And this last book is about them going back to Iran to sort of confront that past. Which is, it's fun in a lot of ways. These are characters I know really well. It's also a little bit sad because I'll be saying goodbye to them for the most part. But what I'm actually I had this idea, this is for a new book that will be after this one, which is not in the spy thriller series, and I haven't really figured out the plot yet. But I know a big part of the premise, and that is, so I was rewatching the movie Argo, and right at the beginning of the movie, they have a descriptor about the past in Iran, about how the CIA and MI6 assassinated the Iranian prime minister in the 50s, and then that led into, the Shah of Iran and everything that happened after. And so, that's definitely growing up in the Middle East. I was broadly familiar with most of that, but I just something prompted me to read about it a little bit more. And when I was thinking about it, it's like, if that assassination attempt had failed, then what would Iran be like? And that means that then you have the biggest country in the Middle East. If it remains a stable democracy, then what doesn't happen, which is like, the Iran-Iraq war maybe doesn't happen. Then you don't have Saddam Hussein, like, all these things. And so I know that I haven't decided on the exact plot, but I know I'm going to write something with that, this kind of alternate history of what the Middle East would be like. So maybe it'll take place, not in Iran, maybe just maybe Kuwait, where I grew up, or maybe part of it will travel into the Middle East and it'll just be a completely different setting. I haven't decided, but that's the premise I'm pretty excited about.
Oh man, that's going to be a very ambitious project, because it's a total like what ifs, because you're going to have to like try to trail that same timeline somehow. Like, okay, if this didn't happen, where is this going to go? How things were. So you definitely have your work cut out for you, but I'm excited to see how that turns out.
Me too.
Well, thank you everyone who tuned in and watched tonight's event, either live or in the future through this same link or through our YouTube channel. Thank you so much, Puja and Sena, for being here with us.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Nick. And thank you, Sena. It was great meeting you.
Thank you too, Puja. You too, Puja. Good luck.
You too.
And again, please go ahead and order their books through Mysterious Galaxy. You can find them either by searching our website, or if you click the link below to head to the events page, because your purchases of their books or any other books really does help support us doing wonderful events like this. So I wish everyone a great night, or in Sena's case, a good morning. it's like 6 a.m. there.
Yeah.
And I hope everyone has a great day tomorrow. Have a great night, everyone. Bye. Bye, Sena. Bye, Puja.
Bye. Thank you. Bye. Bye. Thank you.